Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ken Kratz and the Crime Victims' Rights Board in a moment. I'll actually read the press statement that I referred to in the press reports yesterday. We'll get onto that in a moment. I find it quite interesting that, as I say, in, for example, the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman in Soham, the murderer, Ian Huntley, made a point of inserting himself into the investigation, somewhat similar to how we see Ryan Hilligas inserting himself into the investigation, and him and Mike Holbach being particularly obtuse at times, to the extent that where, although obviously I'm not blaming Mike Holbach for murdering his own half-sister, I am deeply concerned at what he said. The fact that he's clearly lying about a lot of things, and obviously the fact that there was no clamour by press reporters to ever question the things that he was saying. Grieving process could last days. And of course, looking at Ken Kratz, a similar sort of pattern I see in the fact that, you know, people insert themselves to try and protect themselves. They feel like they're in charge. And I can't help thinking that, obviously we know that Ken Kratz left the assistant attorney's job in La Crosse amid rumours already that he was a bit of a deviant. And obviously abused his power and authority. And we know that back in 1998-99, some of the women that came forward were from that time range. So I can't help thinking that from Ken Kratz's point of view, knowing what he enjoyed doing, his fantasies, and as I say, abusing his power, it was one of the easiest ways of getting people to do what he wanted, was to simply threaten them with his power as the district attorney. And one of the best ways to, as I say, to cover his track is to avoid any suspicion being put on him by seeming as if he is this wonderful advocate for crime victims, when in fact, as I say, he's simply inserted himself. He's cleverly seen that the best way of trying to ensure that nothing about him comes out is to be the person in charge. It's like, you know, who do you call when you've got a problem in Wisconsin? It's not like you can call the A-team. What can victims do when the actual perpetrator is the chairman of the Crime Victims' Rights Board? Anyway, as I say, yesterday we read about the fact that the Crimes Victim Rights Board, that was the first thing that Ken Kratz had to do, was to resign from them. And he had to obviously write to the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association because he was their nomination. And as I say, he was chairman since it was first called the Crime Victims' Rights Board, and previous to that it was called something else. And of course Jim Doyle was actually part of the making up of this Crime Victims' Rights Group, Rights Board, which looked specifically at crime victims receiving proper treatment from the legals, from law enforcement, from police, attorneys, judges, etc. You know, to make sure that they are not being abused. And as I say, you've then got, as I say, the fox in charge of the hen house. Anyway, here is the press statement that was released on September the 29th, 2010 at 2:45. It's entitled Press Statement for Immediate Release, Crime Victims' Rights Board Statement Regarding Resignation of Kenneth R., we know what the R stands for, Kratz, from the Wisconsin Crime Victims' Rights Board. Okay, on September the 15th, 2010, the Associated Press reported that Calumet County District Attorney Ken R. Kratz admitted to sending repeated text messages trying to spark an affair with a domestic abuse victim while he was prosecuting her ex-boyfriend. The article stated that Kratz had resigned from the Crime Victims' Rights Board and that the Office of Lawyer Regulation found that Kratz did not violate any rules governing attorney misconduct. On September the 16th, 2010, the Associated Press released excerpts from some of Kratz's text messages. On September the 16th, 2010, the Appleton Post-Crescent reported that it had obtained a copy of Kratz's OLR file and posted copies of Kratz's December the 3rd, 2009 Crime Victims' Rights Board resignation and Kratz's December the 4th, 2009 letter to the OLR on its website. They're not available anymore, I've tried. Kratz's December the 4th, 2009 letter to the OLR stated, quote, "Yesterday, December the 3rd, 2009, I announced my resignation as chairman of the CVRB. In addressing the members of the board, I candidly described my communication with this crime victim. Media reports about the details of the text communications between Kratz and the domestic abuse victim and Kratz's December the 4th, 2009 claim that he candidly described his communication with this crime victim have raised questions about what Kratz told the Crime Victims' Rights Board on December the 3rd, 2009 during the closed session at which Kratz announced his resignation, and what the board did with the information that Kratz provided. On September the 29th, 2010, the board convened a closed session telephone conference call meeting to consider whether the publicly disclosed On September the 29th, 2005, the board convened a closed session telephone conference call meeting to consider whether to publicly disclose the substance of Kratz's statements to the board about the events that preceded his resignation from the board. The board recognises that Kratz's assertion may erode the public trust in the board and cast doubts upon the board's objectivity and commitment to its statutory duties. The board issues this statement to correct Kratz's assertion that he candidly described his communications with the domestic abuse victim and to correct public misinformation about the nature and extent of the board's jurisdiction and authority. And it goes on later on in the statement to say that it's not responsible for this, it's not responsible for that. However, the main point that we want to look at. Item number 1. Kratz's communication to the board on December the 3rd, 2009. So, during the closed session portion of a meeting of the board on December the 3rd, 2009, Attorney Ken Kratz announced his resignation. Ken read a resignation memo to the board members. A brief discussion followed. Kratz disclosed that he had engaged in communications of a personal nature with a victim of domestic abuse he met in his capacity as the prosecutor of a case against her abuser. He did not provide a detailed description of the communications. He indicated that there were approximately as many texts sent to him by the victim of the crime as he sent to her, and he characterized the context of those communications as being of a mutually friendly nature. He indicated he was inquiring of her about the possible of a future friendship after the conclusion of the criminal case. Kratz informed the board that he would not be the one to prosecute the criminal case in which the victim was involved. Kratz informed the board members that his communication with the victim of crime was reported to local law enforcement and investigated by the Wisconsin Department of Justice. He relayed to the DOJ investigation concluded that no criminal conduct had occurred. Kratz told the board members that he was being pressured by the DOJ to resign from the board. He expressed offence and surprised that the DOJ would not be including him in future training activities sponsored by the department. And remember, he was particularly keen to point out that, you know, you're going to need to hire somebody to take over the Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey appeals. In fact, if you remember, he wrote them that letter saying, how can the DOJ thank Kenneth Kratz for his 25 years of unconditional support and exceptional service, or something to that sort of effect. So, as I say, he also indicated that he was very confident that any investigation by the Office of Lawyer Regulation would result in a finding that his conduct did not violate any of the rules of professional conduct. In light of what is now known about the conduct that ultimately led to Mr. Kratz's resignation from the board, it is clear Kratz was not candid with members concerning the circumstances surrounding his resignation. Well done, Crime Victims' Rights Board. He's got a history of lying, of not being candid, of deliberately hiding stuff. In the light of what is now known about the conduct that ultimately led to Kratz's resignation from the board, it is clear Kratz was not candid with members, and Mr. Kratz's December 3rd, 2009 statements are the only communications the board has received about his messages to the domestic violence victim or the actions taken by the law enforcement and regulatory agencies noted. We then have a long list of basically the board explaining why they are not responsible for this, that and the other, that the authority of the board to consider crime victims' complaints of gender discrimination or sexual harassment. And basically what the board is saying is that that's not really their responsibility, you know. So, you know, for the press to, you know, you're really barking up the wrong tree having a go at them. They are purely this body that was set up to look at, as I say, situations where, for example, the likes of Kratz would come before the board and they would decide what to do with this person. Of course, did they ever suspect that their chairman of the board was the worst culprit of all? Possibly not. Anyway, I might try and leave the link in the description below. As I say, we've got so much to look forward to. Particularly looking forward to looking at the civil suit that was filed, as I say, by Michael Fox on behalf of Stephanie Van Groll, and the and the findings of, believe it or not, the judge that considered that case is a William Griesbach. That's Mike Griesbach's brother. So that could be quite interesting, I think. Anyway, that's I've got loads of stuff that I want to do just now. So some more videos. So we'll catch you very soon. Bye for now.